You're oftentimes looking through the ropes, low angles up at the fighters. Also, that makes the fighters appear more dominating and fierce. And again, this was shot with just 2 cameras at ringside. Obviously, the fight was scripted. But back in those days, on a film like this, they wouldn't have had stunt doubles, really. So you had to sort of cast an athletic-type actor for the Davy part. But we see very early on that he's not into the fight. And he kind of looks old. This film has a lot of ties to another film noir called... oh goodness, The Setup, Robert Wise film with, I think Robert Ryan? Yeah. Anyhow. But yes, as a vintage film, a lot of these shots are great. Some inside the ring, some outside the ring, mixing back and forth to overhead, handheld, kind of kinetic, frenetic. Gotta remember, for the 50s, this is kinetic, frenetic editing. You know, this isn't, you don't have computers where you can try everything and it takes 2 seconds. But this is well done. There's some rhythm developing. You actually get a sense that this is a real fight. It's not... And again, here we see a very experimental angle underneath, overhead, looking up at the 2 fighters punching each other. Now, Kubrick would repeat that later on in The Shining and stuff, so you can already see a propensity for the experimental angles that he likes to use. Here we have another example of it. I also really like the lighting because it sort of appears that there's no crowd there, which adds a layer to the surreality, the surrealism of this film in a way. And some of these shots here, again, are kind of like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas type shots when Davy is kind of in between being knocked out and just kind of, you know, barely staying on his legs. But voyeurism, and, you know, we're not going to go into heavy-handed symbolism discussion here, but the voyeurism, Rapallo is getting some sort of sexual fetish or turn-on from watching not only the fighting, but of a man getting beaten. And so the voyeurism, the watching of that to feel... an emotional release or rise from that is very similar to the type of voyeurism that's going on in the apartment building between the 2 main characters as they, you know, watch each other, fantasize, and also live somewhat vicariously through the other's life, and perhaps imagine what it would be like to be together, but they're not. Again, it was a quick fight, it was well shot, it was tight, you know, it's not too long, and obviously for a 65-minute film you're not going to have a very long fight, but effective. I was impressed the first time I saw it. You know, it didn't look fake, it didn't look bad, it didn't have that hammy, 50s action type of acting and stuff, so no problems there for me. Oh, I love this. This could just be a coffee table book right here, you know, Kubrick photographing New York at night in the 50s. You know, and so many films have depicted New York, but not necessarily New York as it is, but New York as it is in that film. We think of, you know, Woody Allen's Manhattan, we think of Eyes Wide Shut, we think of Taxi Driver. The lonely man contemplating in his room. We've seen this a million times in film, the boxer who's at the end doesn't know how to quit. He knows he should, he knows it's time, doesn't know how. And thankfully for Davy, his post-mortem of his fight are broken down by his love interest coming home and flicking on the light. And again, these are sharp professional lighting techniques. One light comes on and it illuminates his room and tells him not only that there's action going on, but as an audience, because we were in the dark, that light turning on immediately draws our eye to looking at, oh geez, what happened there when that light turned on? It's psychologically effective. It's important to note that all the sound effects, all the dialogue, was added and done after the film was shot. Kubrick made, unfortunately, a bad decision and thought he would be saving money. Unfortunately, it ended up doubling the budget and taking 4 months. So some of the lip sync isn't exactly on. I want to add a quick note here about the discussion these days involved about digitizing and putting black and white films on Blu-ray, and how much of the film grain to leave and how much of the flicker versus how much to clean it up. And this is a perfect example right here, because this shot of Davy standing at the dresser talking on the phone to Uncle George, there's a ton of flicker going on in the background, off to the right beside his head and top left, and there's also a scratch in the film frame that's right down the middle that was left on the screen there. So I love how they've cleaned it up, but they've also maintained the flicker and the film grain look, the gauzy documentary feel that you get from a 16mm Aeroflex. Most of the film is filmed on 50mm lens, which gives pretty much what the human eye sees. It's also interesting that when she turns off the light there, he's left with just his reflection in the blackness, sort of in the abyss. Beautiful storytelling, symbolic. Some might say heavy-handed in an amateurish way, but I look at it more as an artist who's honing and developing his craft and developing techniques and strengths and figuring out how exactly he wants to tell things. There's a great sequence coming up here where Davy's going to have a nightmare about the fans jeering him about losing the fight, but it's shown going down a street in negative at a high speed. And this will harken to the 2001 Stargate space sequence. But again, it's also experimental photography, experimental filmmaking technique, which Kubrick obviously was already into in 1955. Davy is awakened to this argument that's going on, and I love this moment because it's real. You would pull down the shade and boom, it wouldn't stay the way it would be in real life. It's not like in movies where you pull down the shade, boom, it's dark. No, he's never been there that much. He's not used to pulling down that shade, doesn't know how to set it, so... Some people said that this whole film was written around the idea of like a 20-minute chase sequence on rooftops, which is an interesting concept because people don't really know how many student films or early films for people are based on a few ideas that are very, very strong, and then they are tried to be strung together with dramatic scenes and scenes of tension that will tie it up. However, when I watch this film, I don't just look at it or see it or feel that it's an excuse for a long chase sequence, because there's so much time spent on developing this love story. Now, obviously the acting isn't great and some of the dialogue is a little heavy-handed, but you can see that Kubrick is going for something a little more than a film noir. We have lots of shifts in time in this film, which is also, it wasn't necessarily terribly in vogue at that time in films. Film noirs, though, particularly, because they're often about people with amnesia or remembering things later after they've been knocked out. So... It always made me curious what made her turn exactly against Rapallo. whether it was the fact that he took pleasure out of Davy's fight and Davy losing, or whether it had just dawned on her that day earlier on when she was looking at Davy through the window. This is a perfect example of film noir photography. You have the guy, the villain in the foreground, who is lit very expressionistically, and a person about 6 feet in the background that they're talking to, listening, but neither are looking to each other. I thought Frank Silvera was quite convincing as this kind of greasy slime ball, kind of old man, rich man, I don't know, a gangster wannabe maybe, or something, but just a greasy kind of old guy. The actress, she was okay, but I do have to say, not fantastic. I love that whip pan on the tripod that cuts between her telling the story and remembering it to her cutting to the present time after she's told it in bed here. It's another experimental touch by Kubrick in this film that nobody gives it credit for. It's a film where the audience is learning everything primarily by hearing what the characters have to say and their stories to tell in this, and then by what they're seeing. And in this film we have 3 different stories being told. We have Davy, who's narrating the overall arching story. But then Gloria narrates first the story about the night, or a few hours previous, when she had her fight with Rapallo, and then what's going to come in the morning, her telling basically her life story. This isn't creepy, but it again speaks to the voyeuristic aspects of, he's been looking into this apartment probably for a while, looking at her, and now she's asleep and he's sort of walking around investigating, getting a better look at things, kind of like in a innocent, childlike kind of way. It's important to remember that inside the film, these characters are what they are, in the sense that Davy is a boxer, a fighter, not terribly educated, doesn't have a lot of family, and is poor. So he lives a very quiet, very intimate, small life, doesn't have a big social circle. And Gloria is going to tell us her life story shortly. Beautiful low-key lighting here. We've also got practicals with that small light bulb you can see reflecting in the mirror over Gloria's head. Her apartment is obviously better dressed, more organized and decorated than Davy's. Davy's apartment was really sparse, really old furniture, junky kind of stuff. Unique touch to have that doll suspended above her bed, and there's a shot of it right there, and we fade to the next morning. And again, he's narrating that what's happened, we're catching up in time. It's a way of shortening the film length, getting information across quickly. But it's also important to remember in this film that we are being told through Davy's memory, Davy's eyes, Gloria's memories, Gloria's eyes. So therefore their stories might have a tinge, not necessarily that they're lying, but just it's from their point of view. And oftentimes in Kubrick films, the women characters are heavily criticized, or the actresses playing them, or both. But it's important to note here in this film that the actress is obviously not a professional actress.